What you're about to hear isn't advice for the needy guy still thinking seduction is won with long texts, explanations, or pathetic hope of being understood. This is for the man who finally gets it. An emotional test isn't innocent chat. It's pressure. It's measurement. It's scanning for weakness. Every time you scramble to reply in the perfect tone, every time you feel that childish urge to justify yourself, every time you rush to fix the vibe because it got uncomfortable, you're not showing maturity. You're handing over your throat. The world doesn't respect a man who loses his center over cheap provocations, calculated silence, or someone else's mood swings. And no, this isn't an invite to become an ice-cold actor, an internet resentful, or some proud idiot who calls trauma self-control. This is about firmness, about dignity, about learning not to hand your emotions to someone who hasn't earned your presence yet. If that bothers you, good. Truth rarely shows up wearing perfume. Picture the scene. She flips the tone out of nowhere. Replies dry. Ghosts for hours. Drops a sideways comment. Mentions another guy for no reason. Makes that joke with just enough venom to rattle you and leave you itching to fix the atmosphere like some high-end emotional waiter. And you, brilliant strategist of your own downfall, jump in, over-explain, over-ask, overreact, over-try to understand. In minutes, you're emotionally sitting in the test's lap, letting it lead you like it's normal. Then you wonder why you lost value. Simple. Because a man who reacts without a filter becomes predictable, and everything predictable loses impact. In this video, you'll see why emotional tests wreck so many men, and how the cold Stoic Seduction method cuts the cycle. No drama, no panic, no theater. Not to manipulate anyone, but so you never again get dragged by someone else's chaos. Stoic Seduction isn't a social media hack or the pose of a wounded dude faking superiority because he can't handle rejection anymore. Stoic Seduction is self-control under fire. It's staying whole while the other person tries to pull anxiety, neediness, validation, or desperation out of you. The average guy enters the test wanting to win the situation. The Stoic man enters wanting to protect his own center. That difference changes everything. Because deep down, emotional tests aren't just checking interest, they reveal structure. They show if you're driven by your own value or fear of losing someone. They show if your silence is strength or a sulk. They show if your calm is presence or just frozen panic in disguise. Throughout this video, you'll understand what these tests really are, why so many men fail them, and how the cold method disarms the game without aggression, arrogance, or begging for approval. Because the moment you stop reacting on impulse, you stop being emotional prey and finally start being read as a man. And that's exactly where it begins. Understanding the nature of the test that always got you without you noticing. Let's cut straight to it. Number 1. What emotional tests are and why they work. Let's rip the gloss off this once and for all, because the man who doesn't get the game keeps swearing he lost out of nowhere, when really he got dismantled piece by piece with his own naivete. An emotional test is any move that pressures your inner state to check if you have backbone, or if it's just nice packaging over expired content. Sometimes it comes as silence, sometimes irony, sometimes contradiction, sudden coldness, subtle jabs, unnecessary comparisons, strategic ghosting, or that deliciously confusing behavior that sends a lot of guys into collapse like they're trying to defuse a bomb with shaky self-esteem. And here's the part that stings the unaware ego. Most times the test works because it doesn't attack your argument, it attacks your neediness. It doesn't care if you talk smooth, it cares if you can handle discomfort without falling apart. It doesn't measure your lines, it measures your center. When she changes tone and you rush to fix the vibe, what she sees isn't an attentive man. She sees someone who can't stand losing emotional control. When she ghosts and you go into detective mode, what shows isn't healthy interest. It shows dependency dressed as concern. When she provokes and you react to defend your image, game over. Your emotions are already outsourced. And why does it work so well? Because most men were trained to believe winning in a relationship means being accepted, understood, desired, and kept. So any sign of instability becomes an emergency. The guy doesn't talk. He puts out imaginary fires. He doesn't spot patterns. He chases relief. He doesn't hold presence. He begs for predictability. And that's exactly where the test finds fertile ground, because nothing is more manipulable than a man who desperately needs everything to be okay to feel in control. Emotional tests thrive where there's fear of loss, hunger for validation, and panic about being misunderstood. That's why some men get sucked into confusing dynamics for months, sometimes years, while swearing they're fighting for the connection. Connection, my ass. They're being measured, pressured, and read in real time like someone pressing on a cracked wall just to confirm it won't hold weight. And the irony is beautiful, almost poetic. The man thinks he's showing feeling, maturity, depth, when he's really just displaying how easily he can be led. Emotional tests work because they reveal if you act from value or fear, and almost always the reactive man picks fear with embarrassing conviction. But the moment you understand this, one thing becomes impossible to ignore. It's not the test that beats you, it's your automatic reaction to it. And that's exactly where the next mistake starts, because the guy who overreacts already entered the game losing without realizing. Number 2. The man who reacts too much has already lost. Now comes the part that hurts because it's too simple to ignore. The reactive man doesn't lose because he loves too much. He loses because he loses control too soon. And losing control, my friend, was never proof of depth. It's just leakage. The guy hears a crooked line, notices a tone shift, sees a delayed reply, and boom, he's in full emotional emergency, like his life's stability depends on that interaction. From there starts the elegant embarrassment festival. Over-asking, over-explaining, over-aligning, wanting to understand what happened, wanting to fix what nobody asked to fix, wanting to recover peace he destroyed by showing he can't handle tension. It's almost touching. The man believes he's being mature, transparent, available, when really he's just signing an invisible contract. If you mess with my emotions, I'll chase to put everything back in place. And the second that becomes clear, it's done. Because whoever can control your reaction no longer needs to win you over. They just need to push your buttons. The reactive man's mistake is thinking intensity makes up for structure. It doesn't. Never has. No woman respects a man who falls apart just because the vibe changed. She might use it, keep him around, even enjoy the unlimited attention, this 24/7 emotional service. But real respect? Respect comes when she sees your calm doesn't depend on her behavior. The reactive man, on the other hand, turns every fluctuation into a public show. He fires back at provocations, tries to clean his image, rushes so he doesn't seem cold, exposes himself so he's not misunderstood, justifies to avoid losing ground. And in that he hands over everything. Fear, dependency, hurry, need for approval, terror of being discarded. It's a full fragility report with PowerPoint slides and an anxiety soundtrack. And the most ironic part is, he thinks the problem is the test, when the real problem is the inability to tolerate discomfort without begging for control. The reactive man doesn't know how to wait, observe, or hold silence. He needs to react because he confuses action with power, when most times he's just acting to ease his own desperation. And whoever acts to ease desperation doesn't lead anything. He obeys fear with perfect discipline. That's why the man who reacts too much has already lost, because he stopped choosing. He became a reflex, a button, an emotional extension of someone else's behavior. And the moment you become that predictable, there's no mystery, strength, or presence left. Just a man who's easily triggered, who can be yanked by anxiety whenever someone wants to test how deep the well goes. But if reacting too much is the signature of defeat, then the question that separates the confused boy from the man starting to wake up is, how do you disarm all this without becoming a silent coward or a bitter statue? That's exactly where the cold method comes in. Number 3. The cold method. Observe, filter, and don't hand yourself over. Now we're at the part that separates man from conditioned reflex, because the cold method isn't a pose. It's an internal procedure. It's not going mute to seem deep or making a blank face while inside you're collapsing like a banking app at the end of the month. The cold method is simple to understand and hard to execute, precisely because it demands something the average guy hates developing: emotional discipline. The first step is observe. That alone humiliates half the impulsive ones, because observing means not rushing to react in the same second, not trying to correct the atmosphere, not handing out explanations like you owe the world stability. Observing is seeing the move without throwing yourself into it. It's noticing the tone shift, the ghosting, the irony, the jab, the inconsistency, and resisting the childish urge to turn everything into a crisis with immediate service. The Stoic man looks before feeling the need to act. And that detail changes the whole game, because whoever observes gains time, and whoever gains time doesn't become slave to the first emotion that hits. Then comes the second step: filter. This is where the intelligence kicks in that many guys lack. They confuse sensitivity with servitude. Filtering is asking, even silently, is this a pattern or just an episode? Does this reveal character, instability, manipulation, or just a normal life moment? Does this deserve energy or distance? Because not every tension needs a reply. Not every provocation deserves a stage. Not every person deserves access to your center. The weak man reacts to the impact. The cold man filters intention, context, and frequency. He doesn't judge by the scare, he judges by the pattern. He doesn't get impressed by the scene. He pays attention to the structure behind it. And then comes the third step, the rarest of all. Don't hand yourself over. This is where a lot of people crumble, because not handing yourself over means not offering your emotions as upfront payment for peace that hasn't been earned yet. It means not begging for clarity from someone who feeds on confusion, not chasing after whoever uses absence as a power tool, not putting on the emotional savior costume just because the vibe got uncomfortable. The Stoic man doesn't surrender to the impulse to fix everything. He holds the discomfort without selling himself to it. He gets that most tests only survive because someone rushes to feed them with reaction, explanation, and fear. When you don't hand yourself over, the test loses oxygen. And without oxygen, every little emotional show starts dying on its own. This isn't empty coldness. It's sovereignty. It's refusing to live emotionally on your knees before other people's instability. While the anxious man wants to end the discomfort as fast as possible, the cold man accepts the tension and stays whole inside it. And that's exactly what makes his presence so heavy. He's not led by the room's temperature. He enters, notices, measures, and decides. He doesn't beg for predictability, doesn't rush to clear noise, doesn't hurry to be understood. He knows that whoever hands themselves over too soon becomes fuel for any confusing dynamic. And when you learn to observe, filter, and not hand yourself over, one thing becomes evident with almost didactic cruelty. Your biggest problem was never her behavior. It was your inability to master yourself in front of it. And that's why the next step isn't to look strong. It's to develop the only thing that really seduces without noise: self-control. Number 4. Self-control is more seductive than any canned line. Now we reach the point where most people quit, pretend they got it, and go back to being the same emotionally unstable guy: self-control. Because talking about silence sounds nice, observing seems smart, filtering sounds sophisticated, but holding your own center when the environment starts poking you, that's no longer theory. It's a character test. The man with self-control isn't the one who feels nothing. He's the one who feels and still doesn't surrender to the ridiculous impulse to react just to ease his own discomfort. And here's the truth. Few can swallow. What seduces most isn't what you say. It's how much you stay whole when it would be easy to fall apart. When she changes behavior and you stay stable, you break the script. When she provokes and you don't join the theater, you break the pattern. When she tests and you don't perform anxiety, you become unreadable. And what can't be read can't be controlled. The average man tries to look strong, tries to show value, tries to hold an image. The Stoic man doesn't try anything. He simply doesn't get disorganized. And that weighs more than any pretty speech, because it doesn't depend on words, it depends on structure. While one is too busy trying to keep approval, the other is too busy keeping his own peace. Guess which one earns respect? Self-control is what turns presence into impact. Because presence without control is just well-dressed neediness, but presence with control becomes silent pressure. The woman may not consciously understand what's happening. She may even try to rationalize it, but she feels it. She feels she can't pull you, can't test you easily, can't predict your reaction, and that messes with anyone used to running the emotional room. The man without self-control reacts to the stimulus. The man with self-control chooses if it's worth responding. And that small difference creates an abyss. Because whoever chooses isn't led. Whoever chooses doesn't beg. Whoever chooses doesn't sell himself for cheap validation. And deep down, that's what disarms any test. Not the perfect reply, but the lack of need to reply. Only when you reach that level do you start noticing something even more interesting, almost cruel. You don't need to win the game, you just need to stop feeding it. And that's exactly where the next level comes in, where the test loses power and you take control without saying a word. Number 5. How to disarm the test without arguing anything. This is where the game really flips, and most men fail in almost artistic fashion, because they think they need to win with arguments when the real power is not entering the arena. Disarming an emotional test isn't giving the perfect response. It's refusing the implicit invitation to prove something. Because every test carries a silent trap. It wants to pull you into a state where you start explaining, defending, or emotionally positioning yourself unnecessarily. And the second you accept that invite, you've lost. The Stoic man understands that not every question needs an answer. Not every provocation deserves attention. And especially not every tension requires immediate resolution. If she drops a hint, he doesn't put on the hat like a desperate guy chasing approval. If she provokes jealousy, he doesn't enter competition like he's fighting for an emotional trophy. If she changes tone, he doesn't rush to adjust the climate like an effective maintenance tech. He simply observes, holds his center, and responds. When he responds, in a clean, direct way without emotional load. And often, silence is already the loudest answer in the room. The point here is simple, but hard to swallow. Whoever tries to explain too much is trying to save himself from possible rejection. And whoever acts like that has already put himself in an inferior position. The man who disarms tests isn't worried about being understood all the time. He's worried about not negotiating his own value because of someone else's instability. He doesn't enter emotional loops, doesn't repeat justifications, doesn't chase clarity when the other person clearly operates in confusion. He understands that confusing behavior is answered with distance, not effort. And that dismantles any dynamic, because the test needs reaction to survive. Without reaction, it loses function. Without function, it disappears. And when you start acting like this, something curious happens. The person on the other side either adjusts to your standard or pulls away. And either option is already a win because you stopped adapting to chaos and started selecting what deserves your presence. But there's a detail here that separates the man who got it from the one who just memorized behavior, doing this without turning into an empty character. Because if it's just acting, sooner or later, the mask falls. And that's exactly what the next point will crush without mercy. Number 6. Coldness isn't a mask, it's emotional discipline. This is where most people fully surrender, because up to now everything seemed like strategy, but now it becomes identity. It's very easy to fake coldness when your ego is pumped or after watching a few videos and thinking you've become untouchable. The hard part is holding that stance when discomfort hits, when doubt creeps in, when the other person's silence starts poking your mind like an insistent parasite. Because let's be honest, my friend, a lot of men aren't cold, they're just hurt trying to look superior. They don't ignore because they have control. They ignore because they're wounded. They don't reply because they have discipline, but because they want to punish. They don't distance themselves for value, but for pride. And then it's not stoicism, it's a sulk with a maturity aesthetic. The real stoic man doesn't need to prove he's cold, because he's not playing against anyone. He just doesn't submit to the emotional chaos that used to run him. There's a brutal difference between the guy who controls himself and the guy who's just acting detached while inside he's at war. One is solid, the other is unstable with good acting. And you know the problem with acting? It gets tiring. Sooner or later, the guy starts replying fast again, explaining again, chasing again, because he never built a base, he just memorized behavior. Real coldness doesn't fluctuate with someone else's mood, doesn't depend on replies, doesn't change because the other changed. It comes from a silent decision. I don't negotiate my peace for validation. And when that's true, it doesn't need theatrical effort. The man simply doesn't enter dynamics that diminish him. He doesn't need to distance with drama, ignore with anger, or disappear as punishment. He just doesn't engage beyond what makes sense. And that, ironically, is way more unsettling than any rehearsed game. Because whoever is used to provoking reactions gets completely lost when they find no emotional resistance. Now, the man who gets this stops trying to look strong and starts being stable. And when he reaches that point, something inevitable happens. The game switches sides. Because it's no longer you trying to stay in control. It's the other realizing they lost access to your emotions. And that's exactly where the turnaround occurs. Number 7. The moment she realizes she doesn't control you. And here, my friend, is where the game quietly flips, without announcement, without warning, without audience. It's not a dramatic moment, no soundtrack, no declaration. It's subtle, but devastating. Because a point arrives where she tests and doesn't find the old you anymore. She provokes and sees no reaction. She ghosts and feels no chase. She changes tone and notices no impact. And then the real discomfort begins. Because what used to work like an emotional button no longer responds to the touch. The man who used to be predictable is now opaque. The one who used to run now observes. The one who used to explain now selects. And that creates an internal rupture in her that many pretend not to see. When emotional control disappears, the interest changes nature. It's no longer about playing. It's about understanding. No longer about testing. It's about regaining access. And here's the point that destroys any cute romantic narrative. What holds attention most isn't who gives in easily, it's who can't be led. When she realizes she can't mess with your center anymore, something breaks. Because her old reference about you no longer works, and no human handles losing predictability over someone who used to be easy to read. She starts recalibrating her behavior, measuring words, testing more subtly, trying to understand the new terrain. And all of this happens while you simply stay stable, no show, no revenge, no need to prove anything. And that's exactly what increases the weight of your presence. Because now you're not reacting to the game, you're above it. And this isn't about dominating anyone, it's about no longer being dominated. The man who gets here doesn't need to win arguments, convince, or fight for attention. He already understood that value isn't negotiated, it's sustained. And when that level is reached, the relationship completely shifts axis. Either she adjusts to this new standard, or she gets lost trying to figure out why she no longer has access to the man who used to respond to every stimulus. And either option reveals the same thing. You left the position of being tested and became the reference. But it's exactly at this point that many men ruin everything, because they confuse power with ego and control with revenge. And when that happens, all the work collapses. Number 8. The mistake of using Stoicism as revenge. And this is where the guy who was doing well trips over his own vanity and goes straight back to square one, only now with an even more dangerous illusion that he's become cold, when really he just became resentful with strategy. Because after the man learns not to react, not to chase, not to explain, he feels power, and that's where the risk lives. If that power doesn't come with maturity, it turns into an ego weapon, not consciousness. The guy starts using silence to punish, absence to cause pain, distance to feed superiority. It's no longer about holding his own center, it's about showing he can hurt too. And just like that, Stoicism is gone. It became just a control game with fancy packaging. The man who uses coldness as revenge is still being controlled, he just changed the direction of the flow. Before he reacted out of neediness, now he reacts out of pride. Before he begged for attention, now he dismisses as a form of validation. In both cases, he's still trapped, still depending on the other's reaction to feel in command. That's not strength, it's just emotional dependency with a self-control makeover. The truly stoic man doesn't need to prove he beat anyone because he's not competing. He doesn't use silence to create impact. He uses it because there's nothing worth saying that would break his own peace. He doesn't ignore to see the other suffer. He simply doesn't engage beyond what's necessary. And that, ironically, is way more unsettling than any power play. Because when there's no intent to hurt, but also no opening for disrespect, you become impossible to manipulate and useless for toxic dynamics. And here's the truth that separates men from boys. Whoever needs to hurt to feel strong is still emotionally on his knees. He just changed the position of the speech. The real Stoic doesn't want revenge, he wants freedom. He doesn't want control over the other, he wants dominion over himself. And when that settles, the game simply stops being necessary. But if you still haven't gotten this, beware. Because playing at coldness without structure is the fastest way to become exactly what you swore you'd never be again. And that's why before closing, there's a warning many ignore and pay dearly for it. Lethal closing. In the end, none of this was ever about women, about tests, or about winning any game. This is about you stopping to behave like an emotionally outsourced man. Because as long as you depend on someone else's reaction to feel stable, you don't control anything. You just have the illusion of participating. The emotional test only reveals what was already there. Your hurry, your neediness, your approval hunger, your fear of losing someone who hasn't proven they deserve to stay. The cold method doesn't turn you into someone better for others. It turns you into someone more solid for yourself. And that's what changes everything. Because when you stop reacting on impulse, stop begging for clarity, stop chasing validation, you exit the invisible game that kept you small. And no, this doesn't mean you'll become a lonely, bitter, unreachable man. It means you'll stop accepting any dynamic just to avoid facing your own emptiness. And that, my friend, is the beginning of respect. First your own, then others. The man who gets this doesn't need to speak loud, explain himself, or prove anything. He simply doesn't sell himself. And in a world where everyone is desperate to be chosen, the guy who doesn't beg has already won without competing. So burn this in. You don't need to win any emotional test. You just need to stop behaving like someone who can be tested all the time. If this video bothered you, good. That was the point. Now comment here. My emotions aren't up for auction. Because the moment you understand this, you stop being an option and become a choice.